Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a real phantom of the clinical lab, Streptobacillus moniliformis. This is a classic zoonosis that's making a comeback, and it's super important we understand it. So we're going to unpack exactly why it's so good at hiding from us, and more importantly, how you can make sure you never, ever miss it. All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with why this bug is such a diagnostic nightmare. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of identifying it, the clinical signs to watch for, and how to actually win the diagnostic game in the lab. After that, we'll talk treatment, susceptibility quirks, and wrap up with prevention and public health. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, the big challenge. Let's jump right into the number one reason this organism gets missed so often. And trust me, it's a problem that's hiding in plain sight. So get this. What if the biggest thing stopping you from making a diagnosis is already inside your blood culture bottle? It's a crazy, frustrating paradox, isn't it? The very tool we trust for sepsis diagnostics, our standard bottle, has a reagent in it that stops this organism from growing. It literally makes Streptobacillus moniliformis a stealth pathogen, completely invisible to our go-to methods. And this number right here, this shows you why this matters so much. We're talking about a 10 to 13% mortality rate for untreated streptobacillary rat bite fever. I mean, think about that. Missing the diagnosis because of a simple issue with our lab supplies can have deadly consequences. This is not just an academic puzzle. Okay, so if our usual methods can totally fail us, how in the world do we actually spot this thing at the bench? Assuming we can even get it to grow. Let's take a look at what makes it so unique. So here's its formal address, the family Leptorchiaceae. Now, for those of us who learned our taxonomy a little while back, this is a pretty big deal. It used to be lumped in with the Fusobacteriae, but modern 16S sequencing gave it a new home. And that's actually important because its new family tree gives us some big clues about why it's so picky and hard to grow. And check this out. This is where it gets really cool. This unique look is literally how the organism got its name. Moniliformis, it's Latin for necklace-like. How perfect is that? It perfectly describes this crazy pleomorphic string of beads look you see on the gram stain. Okay, so for everyone at the bench, this is the key takeaway. The textbook says it's a gram-negative rod, right? But in reality, it can look gram-variable, and it often shows up as this tangled, messy mess of chains. If you don't know what you're looking for, it would be so easy to just write it off as a contaminant or some kind of artifact, and boom, misdiagnosis. All right, let's switch gears a bit. What does this actually look like in a patient? And what are the huge diagnostic traps that clinicians absolutely need to know about? So when you open up the textbook, this is what it tells you to look for with streptobacillary rat bite fever. It's this classic triad: a high relapsing fever, a really distinct rash, and just awful joint pain. But, and listen up because this is a huge clinical pitfall, if you're waiting for all three of those signs to line up perfectly, you are going to miss this diagnosis a lot. We see it in case studies all the time. That rash is often a no-show, especially in adults. So the real message for clinicians is this: if you have a patient with a fever, arthritis, and any history of rodent exposure, Streptobacillus moniliformis needs to be way up high on your list of suspects, period. And just to make things more interesting, you've got to be able to tell it apart from the other kind of rat bite fever, Sodoku, which is caused by Spirillum minus. You can think of this table as your little cheat sheet. The big things to look for are the incubation time and what the bite wound does. But here's the real clincher. That severe arthritis, it's a hallmark of Streptobacillus moniliformis. You almost never see it with Sodoku. All right, back to our home turf, the lab. We know the challenges, so how do we actually beat them and get a definitive diagnosis? And here it is again, the villain of our story. SPS, Sodium Polyanethol Sulfonate, that standard anticoagulant that's in pretty much all of our aerobic blood culture bottles. It absolutely hates Streptobacillus moniliformis. And I'm not talking about a minor inconvenience here. This is the number one reason we get false negative cultures. It's a huge problem. So how do you actually get this thing to grow? Well, you have to give it the VIP treatment. We're talking microaerophilic conditions, lots of CO2, enriched media like blood or serum agar, and a whole lot of patience. It can take a week to show up. If you're smart and using an SP's fruit broth, keep an eye out for those classic puffball colonies just sitting at the bottom. And biochemically, it's super lazy. catalase, oxidase, urease, all negative. Honestly, with all these culture headaches, this is where molecular methods really shine. They are, without a doubt, the gold standard here. A 16S rRNA gene sequence or a specific real-time PCR can give you a solid, definitive answer, often straight from the patient sample. You just get to bypass all that culture drama. Okay, so let's say we found it. Now what? How is it treated? And for us in the lab, this is the really big question. What are the tricky little details we need to know for reporting susceptibility? So the good news is treatment is pretty straightforward. There's a solid international consensus here. Penicillin is the hands-down drug of choice. You'll start with IV, then switch to oral for a total of 10 to 14 days. If your patient has a penicillin allergy, doxycycline is your go-to backup. And even in places without their own specific national guidelines, like the Netherlands, everyone just follows these well-established international recommendations. Okay, now we get to a problem that every single one of us in the microlab knows all too well, the breakpoint void. What do you do when there are no official S, I, or R breakpoints? Neither EUCAST nor CLSI has them for Streptobacillus moniliformis. So how are we supposed to give the clinician any guidance that's actually useful? Luckily, EUCAST doesn't just leave us guessing. They've actually got a formal procedure for exactly this situation. Here's what you do. First, you figure out the MIC. Then, instead of slapping an S or an R on it, you write a narrative comment. You're basically comparing that MIC to what you'd expect for a wild-type bug, the ECOF, and to general PK/PD breakpoints. Then, you just add a clear note saying something like, hey, based on this, the standard dose of this drug should work. Now, here's one thing about Streptobacillus moniliformis that's actually predictable, which is nice. It has a built-in intrinsic resistance profile. You can bet the farm it will be resistant to all aminoglycosides. Why? Well, it's a facultative anaerobe, so it doesn't have the right machinery to even let the drug in. And this isn't just a fun fact for a quiz night. This is critical info we in the lab can give to clinicians right away to make sure they don't waste time on drugs that will never work. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about how to stop these infections from happening in the first place and what this means for public health. When it comes to prevention, it's really all about basic common sense hygiene and just being smart about rodent contact. This is super important for at-risk folks, kids, people with pet rats, pet shop workers, even us in the lab. It's the simple stuff that works. Wash your hands, don't touch your face after handling rodents, and if you get a bite or a scratch, clean it out with soap and water right away. And just so you know, we put this whole explainer together using a comprehensive Gemini deep search. If you want to go down the rabbit hole and check out the primary sources for yourself, we've dropped a link to the full source notebook right in the description. We made this for experts like you, so we genuinely love to hear your thoughts. So here's the final thought. Rats are getting more and more popular as pets, which means we're all going to be seeing this bug a lot more. So that leaves us with a really important question for everyone in the field. Is your lab truly ready to unmask the stealth pathogen when it shows up? I'd love to hear what you think, so please share your experiences in the comments. And hey, if you found this useful, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives like this one. Thanks for tuning in.